Hello, hello, and welcome to this edition of the Change Clinic podcast. Want to welcome back Paula Anastasiade. We've been having quite a few conversations around project management and change management. And unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, we had to reschedule part three. So we're going to combine parts 3 and 4 today. And we're going to not only talk about some of the things that both project managers and change managers need to do, the activities that we collaborate on, but we're also going to have our bonus fourth session, and we're going to talk about that golden triangle of project management, change management, and leadership, because those are the three things that really will keep the project on rails. So welcome back, Paula. Great to have you back today.
Thank you, Pam. It's great to be with you.
Good, good, good. So, we have been talking a lot about project management and change management. We've talked about, should we double hat? Is that a good idea? We've talked about, how do we collaborate? How do we play well in a sandbox? And now we want to, kind of just delve into some of the things that as change managers, we have a lot of different tasks that we complete. And so do project managers. So I guess from your perspective, I would love to hear more about what do you think some of the things that project managers and change managers need to do to really remain collaborative? Some of the tasks that they need to do. So just kind of give me your perspective on what do you think about that?
That's a great question. And obviously, coordination has to boil down to something concrete. There are 7 specific areas or sets of activities that come to my mind based on experience, and that's where I see the collaboration and the coordination between project managers and change managers as essential.
Okay.
For me, it starts from the very beginning, not the very beginning in an ideal scenario, but the very beginning in the everyday scenario of most of us out there, which is change managers being brought on board after a certain series of steps have been taken.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by that is that a change manager will often get brought on board sometime after the project documentation has been prepared.
Yes.
Unfortunately, there are situations where a change manager is brought on board even though there is no project documentation available. So I don't know how it's been for you, but I found myself in various scenarios where I would ask, can I see the business case, the project plan, the project charter, and so on?
Mm-hmm.
When I ask about the project plan and the project charter, the reactions are mild, nothing out of the ordinary. But when I ask about the business case,
Mm-hmm.
which in some situations is prepared by the project manager, but in many other situations it's not done by the project manager, then the look I get is usually a bit bizarre, as if I were, I don't know, coming straight out of Mars, let's say. And I think that's a lost opportunity because the business case contains a lot of important information that would make it much easier for organizations to drive change. For some reason, which I think I suspect,
Mm-hmm.
these business cases are usually kept somewhere in the safe of the organization, probably because they contain financials, including estimates of the return on investment, the costs, the benefits, and so on and so forth. But that does a disservice to what we do. Now, in terms of project plans and project charters, the contribution of a change manager from where we stand, I think, is pretty obvious. Again, I've seen a lot of documents of this sort
Mm-hmm.
where project overview does not contain anything about the problem statement that we're trying to address. And as we know, any project is there either to solve a problem or to improve a certain situation that is already there, which boils down to the organization either saving money or making more money. That is why we generally have projects going on in organizations. Now, a lot of these project plans, project charters, project documents in general fail to tackle what is most important from our perspective as change managers, which is what are we doing in no uncertain terms
Mhm.
Not the complicated verbiage that we think is making us look more intelligent, but in very plain terms, what exactly are we doing? Why are we doing it? What are the benefits? What problem are we solving for by doing this? Or what are we making better as a result of this project? And so on and so forth. So that would be one initial area for me. The second one, of course, has to do with communication. And this is probably very predictable. And here, the issue that I see is that communication is not understood sufficiently, let's say, or correctly in some cases. As we know, both project managers and change managers have communication responsibilities,
Mhm.
but they do not talk to the same audiences. They're not supposed to. They don't communicate the same things. So the scope of their communication work is not the same. Their stakeholders are not the same. So the content of their communication, their respective communication cannot be the same. It's always, I guess it's not surprising anymore, but there are often situations where a change manager is expected to communicate milestone updates,
Mhm.
project status updates to various stakeholders. That is not the purpose of change communication. That is in scope for the project manager and perhaps their team, especially if there's someone allocated to communication specifically for this project. A change communication deliverable or change communication in general is about something entirely different. So it's important for the project manager and the change manager to sit down and discuss these things, hash them out. Now, of course, both are more experienced, and especially if they have worked together before, this is a step they can skip. But in most cases, as a change manager, you get to work with project managers, with different project managers on different projects. So this is a step worth revisiting time and again. The next area that comes to mind is risk management, because we do have risks from a quote unquote technical perspective. In other words, risks that have to do with the solution itself, with the delivery, the design of the solution. But we also have risks that have to do with the adoption and the usage, the proficiency. Um, so all those things that have to do with change management.
Yeah.
And these have to be integrated. And I do not see risk management as an activity where the change manager is a contributor, a mere contributor who goes in and logs some risks in the risk log. No, from my perspective, all risks have to be reviewed, not just entered by, but reviewed. No matter who enters them into the risk log, they have to be reviewed by both the project manager and the change manager. Which leads me to the next topic, which is also very similar, as I see it, change request management. And this is a very thorny topic because for a very long time, and this is something we touched on in the previous episodes, I think, change management was understood by the Project Management Institute as change request management. In other words, managing the requests to adjust the scope of a project. And these requests can come from any stakeholder, essentially. That is
Mhm.
a technical activity. It has to do with the scope of the project. Now, in 2021, the Project Management Institute revised their definition of change management and aligned it to how the change management industry sees the discipline of change management. But change request management is still something that should involve change managers because almost any change on the technical side is likely to have an impact on the people side. So, again, thinking in terms of adoption, usage, and proficiency. Um, and then there are other things that perhaps don't seem as intuitive that come to my mind. The updates that the change managers and the project managers respectively need to prepare
Yeah.
when meeting up with the steering committee. Unfortunately, it's very um, common to see project managers preparing their own updates in isolation and
Mhm.
change managers preparing their own updates in their own little square.
Yeah.
The idea would be for the two of them to join hands and prepare these joint updates. Of course, each will present their own piece, but the stake, the in this exercise is that in front of the steering committee you will always go, not always, but most of the time you will go not just with updates but with uh, an ask. You are asking them for something, whether it be, you know, can you please authorize this, or here are our choice points. We need to choose a certain direction and we need your approval. And unfortunately, there are situations where the project manager and the change manager, instead of playing like a team in front of the steering committee, they each advocate for their own um, interest.
Mhm.
And that often turns the conversation into a dispute. And it's really unfortunate if it goes that way.
No,
And
I truly agree. So let's go back, and I want to unpack some of the things that you've talked about. So you started off talking about the whole case for change.
Mhm.
You also mentioned that from a change perspective, a lot of times we get brought in not necessarily in the beginning of a project, which is true. We don't get brought in the beginning, so sometimes we don't have the opportunity to see that case for change. But I think that having the ability to see the case for change will help us guide the change activities, because we don't have all the answers coming in. If we don't come in the beginning, 9 times out of 10, we're not afforded that opportunity to be a part of those impact assessment type workshops where we get that type of information. We're not there to understand who are all the key players and who are the key stakeholders. So having that case for change is going to be a document that's going to be critical for us from a change perspective. So that's one of the things that I would implore change and project management folks to come to the table and sit down and talk about. These are the ways of working for us, because if we can't work together in things as simple as allowing us to have access to a case for change. And I, for one, have never been denied access to a case for change, but I'm sure that there are probably some instances where when a change person has come in and asked for this type of documentation, that there's been some resistance or hesitancy. But from a realistic perspective, it is critical for us to have that information, because we can't be successful without understanding. One of the things that I like to do when I go into projects, and we talked about this quite a few sessions ago, is the change magnitude assessment. Because the change magnitude assessment gives us, from a change perspective, the sheer size of the implementation that we're doing, the magnitude of change that we're putting up on the organization. It lets us know, how many roles are we impacting? How many locations are we impacting? Are people centralized or decentralized? Because we don't have this information coming in, because we didn't come in on the front end, we have to have some of this information from the case for change. So I wholly agree with you that we do need to have access to that information, because without it, all we're going to do is go back and ask questions that people are probably going to say, you should have already known these things. But the reality is, if we weren't a part of the project, how could we have known these? And so we have to go and get this information some type of way. So for anyone who's listening or will listen to this future state, whether you're a project manager or a change manager, I implore you, if we can't get on that project from the beginning, let us have access to that information, because it's only going to serve to make not only the change management perspective of it successful, but the whole project management piece of it as well. We we like to separate ourselves, but at the end of the day, we are playing in that same sandbox, and we have to play in that same sandbox. The second piece that you talked about was communications. Communications, to me, is critical. It is almost a key linchpin of how we engage and keep people up to date with what's going on. In the absence of communication, people will make up their own instances of what's happening, why it's happening, when it's happening. But that's where it's our jobs, Paula, is to help these folks understand not only what's happening, but why it's happening. Because, I said this many moons ago. At the end of the day, most people really don't care, you know, what is happening. They really care about why it's happening and how will they be impacted and what's the impact to them and what will be different in their day-to-day job. What do I need to learn different? Will I be in a new location? Will I have to sit around people that I've never sat around before? Because people are coming back into the offices now. You know, organizations are mandating people to come back into the organization. All of these things are critical for us from a change perspective. And I know sometimes people like to say, well, you know, change management is just the fluffy stuff. It's just the people side of things. Um, that is the biggest part of any implementation because, you know, a project will get implemented whether change management is there or not. And I've seen it happen, and I've seen projects go really well without change management. I'm not gonna, you know, say that it didn't. And I've seen some projects go really south without change management, with and without change management. But with us, we have it, or the projects really have a greater chance of success because of the things that we will be doing from the people side, which really frees up the project manager to go and do more project management related activities, such as, you know, um, looking at the financials, keeping the financials up to date, working with the leadership on their side while we're working with the leadership on our side. So I think that communication piece is very critical. And I always like to create a drip communication because I think there's always something to say from a project perspective. I've had some project managers, some leaders, some sponsors say, hey, we're not saying anything because there's not much to say right now. We're in this lull where we're building, where there may not be anything to say from your perspective, but from the people who are being impacted by this change, we can tell them something. There's always something that we can tell them from a communications campaign. So I love to have a communications drip campaign going because we are constantly feeding them things, even if it's just little tidbits of information. It doesn't have to be a full-blown communication. It can be an infographic. It can be something as simple as a slide where you put on a plasma TV. It can be something that you can put on people's desktops. There's many ways to get information out there, but I think that we, from a change perspective, really have to think about how do we communicate. The other thing that you talked about was risks. I've been a part of projects where some project managers they already have their risk register, and they don't really care about the risk that we're bringing in to, you know, into the project, because a lot of times we talk with stakeholders outside of project managers, right? We sit in process design workshops where we hear risk. We're capturing risk from many different perspectives, not just a project perspective. We're capturing risk from a people perspective. We're capturing risk from a communications perspective. We're capturing risk from if we don't properly train people and give them that knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need. And I think those risks that we bring from a change management perspective truly needs to just not sit alone in our own, what we call our change risks. We need to share those risks with the project managers, those project managers. And when we're talking about how to, the activities that we undertake, this is a critical one because we should take those risks, share it with the project management team. If they're not duplicative of anything that they already have, I feel like those risks need to be placed into that risk register and tracked just like every other risk, because those risks are critical to the success of the project. And the last thing that you talked about that I really want to talk about as well is the whole management of change thing. I can't tell you how many times that I've gone into organizations and people said, yeah, you're management of change, right? And I was like, no, I am not management of change. I am change management. And just by switching those two words around, management of change and change management, it's an entirely different thing. It's an entirely different skill set. It's an entirely different competence. Because just as you said, Paula, when we're talking about management of change, we're talking about the changes that a system needs to undergo in order for whatever reason. You know, it's you have CAB reviews, you have your change advisory boards. All these people are, you know, involved in it. And to your point as well, change management truly does need to be a part of that management of change, because whatever change you're making to the system may be a change that's going to impact an end user. So I agree with you 1,000% on all the points that you've made, and I think that they're very relevant. And I think these are the types of activities that, when we come into a project, We truly need to sit with the project manager, project leader, project coordinator, whomever, and say, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about our ways of working and how we will work. Because if we don't do some of the things that we just talked about, I think our chances for success lessens by a great percentage.
Yeah. And to your point, perhaps it's an unfortunate choice in terms of denomination. The name itself, change management, lends itself to a lot of misunderstanding because this is the official term, change management. Um, I prefer to use organizational change management instead because it removes some of that confusion. Management of change, on the other hand, is often a term that we encounter in manufacturing contexts,
Yeah.
where, for example, you need to change something in the assembly lines or equipment. So, like physical changes, technological changes in that context, if you will. Whereas change request management has to do with the scope of the project. We add more on the plate. We want something else done instead. They usually come or should come with an adjustment in terms of time and budget. So that's just one of the many things that we can talk about. Now, there was one last area that I wanted to touch on
Mhm.
in terms of where project managers and change managers really need to join hands. And I think this is perhaps the most delicate and difficult area of them all,
Okay.
conflict resolution. What comes to mind is that Latin adage, si vis pacem, para bellum. That means if you want peace, prepare for war. What that means in the context that I'm thinking about is that project managers and change managers ultimately focus on different things that sometimes come at odds.
Okay.
There's going to be tension at some point because while project managers may be focusing entirely on delivery, as they should, because this is their role,
Hmm.
and they may want to speed things up because we're on a tight schedule here, which makes complete sense. We might want to slow things down, for example, and take the time to run a number of activities to ensure that the change actually lands well with people.
Hmm.
So this is just one example where there can be tension between what project managers are uh, looking for and focusing on and what change managers are trying to prioritize. So I think that in the spirit of collaboration, but also in the spirit of being mature professionals, in the
Yeah.
beginning of the collaboration, it's worth sitting down and having a very honest conversation about this very um, large elephant in the room, which we cannot pretend we're not seeing, and just have an honest conversation. Hey, at times we will not be, let's say, pulling in the same direction. You
Yeah.
will press for certain things. I will prioritize certain things. Sometimes we might be competing for the attention of our steering committee. Sometimes we may come in conflict as a result of resources. And by the way, resource planning is another area where we need to work together, which I
Hmm.
have on before. So how shall we prepare for those situations where we might need to manage this conflict? Because I think we can agree that it's in no one's interest to be locked in conflict that we cannot find our way around.
Exactly.
So how do we do this? Do we want to sit down and sort it out like two grown-ups who are putting time into resolving their differences, or do we want to be kids at the kindergarten um, shouting and trying to get the teacher to sort things out? And the teacher in this case would be the steering committee. That is not the mature way to do things. So with project managers and change managers who are relatively mature, I don't think there's a need to explain why this is needed. But when both parties or one of the parties is not very comfortable with this way of working together, it might be a bit difficult to, first of all, talk about the elephant in the room and make the other person see that you don't want this, but it is very likely going to happen. So we might as well prepare, because it's one thing to deal with issues when you have some sort of notion that they are likely to come up. And it's a completely different story when you are taken by surprise. And the potential for frustration, resentment, and protracted conflict is there when you don't know what to expect and you don't prepare for it.
And this is why it's critical that we are brought in earlier in the process, because I see a lot of this happens when we come in late into the game. Because then when we come in late, again, I mentioned we start to ask questions that, people get frustrated with us very quickly because we're asking questions that they feel like, where we've already passed that. We've already done that. But the reality is, when you come in from a change perspective, you don't know what they haven't done. And so you're asking these questions and bringing up things. And sometimes the things we bring up actually can cause a project to, go on pause. And that's something project managers typically don't want us to do. And that's why, the rub is there. But I think one of the biggest things that you talked about, and I really want to unpack this, is about how do we do this? The first thing I think we need to do is strip all of the egos away. Take the egos off the table, because, regardless whether you're project management, whether you're change management, we're all there to do a job, and a very good job, because it's not about us. It's about the implementation, and it's about the people that we're impacting. So trust me, if we do a good job, it'll get seen, it will get known. But I think we have to come to the table as adults, strip the egos. And I'm not your project manager, I'm not the change manager. We're just two people trying to make sure that we're doing the best that we can to get this project up and off the ground. Because I can guarantee you, if we go into a steering committee meeting and we're at odds, it's going to show. It's going to manifest itself in some significant way that the steering committee will see it, and then we will all look. It will be a bad look for all of us.
Yeah.
So if we're going to argue, I don't care if we want to argue, and let's argue, fuss, fight, and do whatever we need to do, but let's do it behind closed doors. But when we go into a steering committee meeting, when we go into a leadership meeting, when we go into a meeting to talk about where we are from a project perspective, the milestones, those milestones need to include change management as well. But when we go into those conversations, we best go in there as a united front. Because if we go in there other than, we will look other than. And then, and this is where people start to say, well, you know what? I don't need change management anyway. And this is where people start to say, you know what? We don't need them. Let's let them go. Or, if they're contract resources, they won't be there very long. If they're internal resources, then all of a sudden the work that they're doing starts to get reduced more and more and more until it's, it's negligible, that they're not really doing anything other than just kind of spinning their wheels and being administrative people. And that's not what we're designed to do either. So I think, to answer your question, how do we do that? We come to the table, we have a conversation, we have an honest conversation, we strip away the egos, and we talk about how do we make the project successful? Because again, I talk about this to project teams all the time. We're not building whatever it is for us. So, I'm not trying to make the Sears Tower for myself the most beautiful, but I need to understand the needs, the perspective, the wants, the desires of those that are impacted from every level, all the way from C-suite, all the way down to frontline, because I can guarantee you the perspective from frontline to C-suite is going to be totally different. So understanding their points of views, hearing the voice of the customer, because at the end of the day, those are our customers. Yes, the C-suite, we are interested in any and everything that they have to tell us from a leadership perspective, from a decision perspective. But guess what? We also have to understand the people that are doing the jobs day in and day out, those who have physical fingers on the keyboard, who's actually doing the job. They can lend us some advice that can probably be very useful in the implementation of whatever it is we're trying to do. So that's the information that we bring into the game for the project managers to help. Because guess what? If we're trying to do something with the system, and there's someone who, may have done this at a different company in the system, they can very well tell us, hey, this won't work for our specific area because. and maybe this is information we can share back with the project team. Maybe they can think about it from a different perspective, maybe not. But if you never get to hear those perspectives, we can't be successful. So
Here's the thing: there are several things that uh, stood out for me in what you said, and especially what you said around ego.
mhm,
I think it's very easy to conflate personal ego with professional ego. I think that any professional worth their salt
mhm,
should have some sort of professional ego, meaning taking pride in their work
yes,
done the right way.
yes,
And so when we get in conflict, it may not even have to do with this person's personal ego or that person's. It can just have to do with professional ego.
mhm,
But just like we cannot necessarily get angry because someone does not speak our language,
mhm,
we cannot really get angry because the project manager simply does not speak the language of change management or vice versa.
of
And this
course,
is where I believe so strongly in the need for a joint curriculum, which we touched on previously.
yes.
So I'm not going to go back into that. But with that type of approach, we both can build those essential, let's say, linguistic skills,
Yeah.
so that we can find some common ground, so that we don't look at each other as if we were aliens. When the project manager talks about, I don't know, milestones or schedules or whatever things they are working on, budget, for example,
Mhm.
and we talk about how people need to understand and accept why you cannot impose certain things, even though in many organizations it is thought that yes, that's how it works. The
Yes.
appeal to authority, forcefully imposing certain things. So that's why I think we need that type of dialogue and the language to do it.
No, I agree 10,000%. I do think that from a change perspective, it is good for us to know and understand the language of project management. And I think from a project management perspective, it's great for them to understand and speak the language of a change manager. I think it only helps us become stronger because steel
Yeah.
sharpens steel, right? And I think together we are a dynamic duo that can catapult a project to great success. You know, and it's not about, when I say speaking the language, it's not about me trying to be a project manager because that's just not my lane. But if I can understand how project managers work, if I can understand a little bit how project managers think, and which I do because I've been around a lot of great project managers, it really helps me from a change perspective and understanding how to better work with them. And I think when project managers understand a little bit about how to think from a change perspective, it makes it that much easier because when we're having those conversations together, um, they think and they speak from a change management perspective. I can really tell when I'm working with a project manager that's either done change management themselves or have worked with great change managers because they speak from a great change mindset. And I can tell good change people that have worked with project managers because they really talk about how do we integrate and work together. Um, so I think that together we can seriously be that dynamic duo to get those projects done on time, within scope and within budget, and with as minimal disruption to the business as possible, because that's really what our jobs are designed to do, is to minimize that disruption, not only to the business, but to the person themselves. Because, we talked about this in maybe our first episode about how even though everybody's on a change journey, everybody's on their disparate change journey. No one's on the very same journey. Everybody's not pushing through at the same time. The project is pushing through at the same time. But there's a lot of work to do to get everybody moving in one direction, because at the end of the day, we don't move organizations, we move people. And when you start to move people in mass, then you get an organizational shift. And that's what we are trying to do. So I think that kind of nicely segue into the next piece about, the golden triangle. And I know that you've written about this and you've had a lot of great insight about this. So, talk to us a little bit about how do you feel the golden triangle should work, or yeah, how should it work within projects?
Um, I imagine there might be people who are perhaps new to change management, watching us now or later. So perhaps it's worth going a little bit into the so-called technical definitions of these roles. So technically speaking, a sponsor is, and especially a primary sponsor, meaning the main sponsor of change initiative.
Yes.
It is usually a high-ranking leader
Mm-hmm.
who authorizes a specific change and who has a vested interest in seeing that change through.
Yeah.
That project, that primary sponsor can be an executive sponsor, for example, if it's a high profile change initiative
Yeah.
with a high risk and, of course, high impact. But the primary sponsor can also be a leader at a different level, at a lower level of the organization, depending again on the nature of the change, the impact, the scope, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, traditionally, the sponsor has been seen as someone who has a generous pocket to make things happen and a resounding name that opens doors. And that's where it stopped for many people, including for many project managers. I can distinctly recall this project many years ago, where I was the only change manager in the room. Everyone else was a project manager. And some people could not understand why I kept insisting on the role of the sponsor.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to see that at some point they started debating amongst themselves what a sponsor does and who a sponsor is. So it was
Mm-hmm.
easy to see that even they were not aligned in terms of what a sponsor is. From our perspective in change management, of course, the sponsor has to have those two attributes, but it's not enough. The sponsor has to be actively involved. The sponsor has to have a strong conviction for the change that they are leading. Without their personal conviction, their personal enthusiasm, their strong involvement with the change, nothing is moving. I know it's very nice to talk about bottom-up change and how we would like to see more of that. But the reality in most organizations is that most changes happen on a top-down manner, in a top-down manner, because it's not going to be people asking for, a new HR system, for example, or who knows whatever tool, unless the tool is really bad.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the changes, most of the organizational changes, especially the big and costly ones, they are decided top down. So this is what a sponsor needs to do. They need to be actively involved, communicating with people all the time at all levels, showing their enthusiasm, being there to understand what people are looking for. Of course, they will not be able to do all of that themselves, especially in a globally distributed team, in a highly complex organization from a structural perspective. That's why they have change managers and a few other important roles.
Yeah.
Um, if you will, um, let's take the example of an election campaign. And I always look at change initiatives as an election campaign.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be a very popular perspective because many people want to think that organizational change is mandatory. I argue that it's not mandatory. And we've seen plenty of examples where people actually got fed up and they decided to find a way to bypass the change or leave the organization altogether.
Yes.
That's what we should never forget. People are always free to choose. Maybe the options, maybe the choices are not great, but people will always have a choice and they will exert their freedom to choose. If we understand that, then our prospects for running successful changes suddenly become brighter. Now, in an election campaign, you've got a candidate on stage, and that candidate is the primary sponsor, this leader who is the face of the project. This leader is trying to get people to vote for them, right? And for that thing to happen, this person has to be out on the so-called campaign trail all the time, to
Mm-hmm.
advocate for the change, to show enthusiasm for the change, to communicate credibly and consistently about the change, why it's needed. And by the way, the primary sponsor is the preferred sender of messages around why a change is needed. Um, and of course, that person is not alone on stage. Uh, He or she is the only person we see on stage, but they're definitely not alone. Backstage is someone like a campaign manager, and that's the change manager. We belong backstage, and our job is to create the strategy for the campaign, come up with a strategy that will get this leader elected. The project manager, on the other side, is an enabler, of course, for all of this, because if you as a candidate you only promise things that don't exist in reality, people will not vote for you, right? So this is what the project manager is doing. The project manager ensures that whatever is being promised, the solution, let's call it generically the solution, is designed, developed, and delivered.
Yes.
So this is how I see this let's say golden trio
Okay.
of change.
So I think you have a great perspective on that. I'm gonna provide an alternative perspective from a golden trio perspective. So we have this triangle. We have project management, change management, and leadership. I agree that change is top down from at the beginning, because you have those folks who sign the check and they say, yes, we're going to go through with this project. We're going to make sure that it's done. But I have also seen where a lot of those sponsors abdicate their duties down to others, or just kind of neglect their duties altogether. I tend to feel like change is really driven at that middle management level.
Yeah,
That is truly a forgotten level, and I'm saying forgotten from the sense that um, people always say that leadership. I mean, people always say that change is driven from the top. I feel like change is initiated from the top.
yeah,
Change is started at the top. It's signed. It's funded by the top. But when you really get down to the heart of it, it's that middle management level. Because again, I think we talked about this in a session or two ago, that they are the layer that's squeezed, right?
yeah,
They're squeezed because they're stuck between being there for leaders, and they're stuck with being there for their employees. From a leadership perspective, they get information that some of the information they're allowed to cascade, but there's some information that they can't cascade. And then there's the people that they lead, who are coming to them and saying, hey, Paula, I'm hearing about this change. I'm very concerned. I may have some information, or you may have some information as their leader that you cannot share, but you also have to be prepared as their leader to help quell some of that angst and that anxiety that they have. So you talked about conflict resolution earlier on with the project management and change management. I think that kind of extends into that golden trio as well, because sometimes we have to resonate with leaders that we have to be able to communicate some of these things correctly, transparently, to those that are impacted. So that kind of leave those people in the middle kind of stuck, because they're stuck with, number one, having to run the business and be a part of the change, and they're also stuck with, and I hate to use the word stuck, but that's really kind of where they are. And they're also having to manage the business, keep the business running, and then they have to be that leader that has to also participate in the change as well. So I think from my perspective, change is really a big push from the middle, and they're often forgotten about because people don't necessarily take into account how they're feeling, what they're seeing, what they're hearing, the pulse of the organization, because those are the folks that have their fingers on the pulse of the organization, because those are the folks that's running the business, right? So they're the ones who can really tell us what's really happening, how people are really feeling, how people are really thinking. We talked way back when about all the things that we must do from a change management perspective and all the things that we must partner with all of the project management with. But some of the things that we do need to talk about from a change perspective is, when we come in and we do our stakeholder assessment, our impact assessment, our readiness assessment, risk assessment, all of those things, when we go into execution, those assessments kind of go on a shelf in a sense because we are now just executing against the data and insights that we've gleaned from all of those assessments. But I do think at certain points, we need to go back and revisit a lot of those things because project changes all the time for many different reasons.
Yeah.
And it could be something as severe as our sponsor isn't being that sponsor. So that golden triangle isn't as golden because our sponsor isn't leading the way that we want them to lead. They're not being active, they're not being visible, regardless what we try to do, regardless how many conversations we have with them. So maybe we need to revisit that because now we're having to change out that stakeholder for another stakeholder, which means we're now getting another sponsor who may have a slightly different vision for what we're doing from a project perspective, who may have a slightly different vision on how change management and project management should play together and how should they as a leader get into this mix. So I think, one of the things that I just want to kind of keep top of mind for all of us, project management, change management, and leadership, that when we're doing all of these assessments and things of that nature, because I know from a project management perspective, the project plans are evergreen. So they live in them, and a project is never done. I mean, even after we go live, sometimes a project is never really done because I always like to say, from a change management perspective, when the project goes live, that's really when the work for us starts because now we're in, sustainability. We're trying to make sure that the changes that we've made stick. But I say all that to say, having that golden triangle is critical. We need project management because they think from that critical perspective of how do I get this done. You said yourself, just like the election, they need to orchestrate that for that campaign. From a change perspective, we need to think about what are the right things they need to say, how do they need to present themselves, what's the right way to present themselves, how do they say it in a way that it resonates with people. Are we breaking it down in plain language, or are we using um, organizational speak that no one knows what we're talking about? So all of those things are things that, we do. And you were 100% spot on when you said, hey, we are background players. We are ancillary support. We support the leaders. 9 times out of 10, when leaders go up on the podium and they're saying those great speeches, no one have a clue that half of that stuff was probably written by a change manager somewhere, that in coordination with that leader, of course. But, they don't have any idea that we've done that. When communications go out, just because we're in the background helping create communications, we're not always the sender of those communications. You spoke about who needs to be the right people or person to send those communications. It's not always us. No one necessarily wants to hear from Pam or Paula. They want to hear from their leader. They really want to hear from their mid-level manager, that manager that we talked about is stuck in the middle. That's who they really want to hear this message from because they're going to be the ones that either going to make or break this. Because remember when we talked about the relationship between managers and the people that they manage, and maybe for a lack of better way of explaining this, I see that as a parent-child relationship because when we do things, our kids try to emulate us. And so they want to be like us. And when we see our leaders act in a certain way, 9 times out of 10, what we do, we emulate our leaders. So if our leaders are saying that things are crappy, not always, people don't always follow this, but, historically it's been shown that if leaders think things are crappy, 9 times out of 10, a lot of their staff would think it's crappy. If leaders think it's good, most of their staff would support it. Now, you'll never have 100% on either side supporting or not supporting. There's always that percentage. But, this is where it becomes important for us to work with the sponsors from both a project management perspective, a leadership perspective. As I said both, but from a project management perspective, a leadership perspective, and definitely from a change management perspective.
I'm not too sure about the leader as a parent. I've seen that in certain contexts. It typically doesn't play out well because grown-ups don't like to be seen and treated as kids. And when leaders out of the best intentions, of course,
Yeah.
feel that sense of responsibility towards people. That's great. But
Mhm.
when they treat them like kids who perhaps don't know what is best for themselves, um, don't know what to choose, should be guided slash micromanaged every step of the way. People grow resentful,
Yeah.
and rightfully so. So I wouldn't necessarily advocate for the leader as parent,
Oh, no,
but
no. Let me clarify. I'm not advocating that the leader is acting as a parent. I said I see it as a parent-child relationship, just from the perspective of when you do something as a leader, people follow you because you do something, right? So
mhm.
if they see me
Yeah,
acting in a very positive way, most of the people that I lead will probably act that way as well. I'm not saying
yeah.
that a leader treat people as kids. No, that's not what I'm saying. And if that's how it came off, I apologize because that's not what I meant. But I mean from the perspective of kids emulate what they do.
No, and
I
you're
have
right. You're
a
right.
4-year-old granddaughter, and she watches everything I do, and it's so funny because now when she sits in the bed with me, she goes and she grabs a pillow, she props it up, she pulls the cover on her, and she's ready to watch TV because that's how I sit in the bed and watch TV. So
No, it
from
makes
that
it makes complete sense. It makes
it,
complete sense, and that's precisely why we need leaders who are so engaged and active. Precisely because people look up to them. They may not, the leaders, may not always realize that people are watching, and they are watching all the time.
yes.
And yes, they are voting for them and their initiatives by their very presence day after day.
Oh, of course, of course.
The day they stop casting their vote in favor of that leader, of whatever they bring to the table in terms of initiatives, actions, and so on, is the day they decide to, as we say in Romanian, pick up their toys and leave. And that happens a lot.
Yes, and we don't want people to pick up their toys and leave. And really,
No.
thank you so much for your comment here. It's great to see when project managers such as yourself really want to delve into that change management side. So that's super exciting. And if you ever want to have any continued conversations, Paula and I offline are more than welcome to have some additional conversations with you. But thank you for your comment.
Aura is a fantastic project manager. We've worked together. She's one of my closest friends, actually, and that's how we became friends. So this is one of the examples where, and we have a lot of interesting conversations whenever we go out and get coffee or
Yes.
travel together. We always have a lot of interesting conversations about project management and change management. So
So, I think this has been a very insightful conversation, and we can probably go on for days and days and days and talking about how do we as change managers interact with project managers, and how we bring in leadership into this process. There's lots of great literature out there. So, go arm yourself with some of this literature, read about the golden triangle because it's going to be critical regardless if you're working as a project manager or a change manager, because at the end of the day, we have to work as one team on one mission to get the job done. So, Paula, I truly thank you for all of your great insight on this topic. And I know we've started off talking about should we double head as project managers and change managers, and that's probably still an ongoing conversation for lots of organizations and lots of people who are project managers who do change management work, and maybe even vice versa, change management people who may do some project management work. But just think about the fact that when you double hat, you're now taking on two roles that's sitting on your shoulders, and it's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult at best to be successful in doing that because they're different competencies, they're different roles, and project management is a lot. And I have mad respect for project managers, honestly, because I don't know how they do it. I just don't know how they do it because there's so much from a project management perspective, and I have mad respect for them. And I know trying to throw change management in on top of that is a hard ask. So truly appreciate our audience and everyone who's joined us throughout these 3 episodes that we smashed into 4. But um, thank you guys. It's been a pleasure definitely having the conversation with you guys. Paula, would you like to?
Thank you so much, Pam. It's been a great experience. We started off by discussing perhaps having one conversation, and we suddenly clicked and decided to do a mini series. I'm very grateful for this opportunity, and I'm grateful for everyone who took the time to be with us or to catch up on the recordings as they became available. And definitely, we haven't exhausted the topic. I truly hope that we can at least get more conversations going on LinkedIn in organizations. We really need to be talking more about this, precisely because breaking down the silos when
Mhm.
it comes to project management and change management is not necessarily a matter of having the same person double hat,
Yes.
which I would not recommend, if only for with reasons, not to mention skills and focus and experience, if only for the bandwidth reason.
Yes.
But I see dismantling silos as coordinated PM/CM work.
Yes. And Alexandru, I hope I said your name correctly. You are 100% correct that, sponsors can make a break. Influence. That's exactly why when we do stakeholder assessments, we talk about stakeholder mapping and how important stakeholder mapping is. Because if you don't understand people's level of influence on the project, it's going to be a hard thing. Because not just sponsors, and I know we're kind of coming at time, but not just sponsors, but if you think about trying to identify those people who are passive resistors, and those passive resistors could be very influential people in organizations. They can also make or break the levity of your project. So thank you for the comment. Truly appreciate it. And again, thank you to everyone who has shown up for Paula and I across these three podcast episodes. I hope to work with you again, Paula, on some additional work in the future, and look forward to hearing you guys' comments. If you if you want to leave us some comments, we will definitely address them in the comments section. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day and hope to talk to you guys again soon.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.